Well, happy Friday, everybody. Thank God we made it through another week. I'm Jimmy Young, the host of Green Rush Live, our weekly look at the business of cannabis. And every week we are joined by my co host and friend, David Rabinovitz. Hi, David.
Hey, Jimmy. Good to be here.
Oh, boy. Now I hear myself in the background. That's kind of funky. But anyway, we're also third Friday of the month. Every month we get the opportunity to talk with Morgan Fox. He is the communications director of the NCIA, and his beat is Washington, D.C. And Morgan, thank you very much for joining us once again on this third Friday of the month.
Thanks again for having me. Always a pleasure.
And I think the first thing I do want to touch on, for those of you who don't get it, there's actually been a passing of a very important member of the cannabis advocacy movement over the last few decades. His name was Steve Fox, and he was a personal friend of Morgan. Did I get the name right, Morgan? You're Morgan Fox. Was it Steve Fox?
Yeah, that's right. No relation, but
no relation. Okay, that kind of threw me a little bit. Tell me a little bit about who he was and what he was all about, and why the cannabis community in general is mourning his passing.
I mean, Steve was one of the very first political activists to really get involved in cannabis at a very high level, particularly with trying to convince Congress to change policies around cannabis. When he started working at Marijuana Policy Project back in 2002, he was the very first federal lobbyist for ending prohibition. And he was also the architect of Amendment 64 in Colorado, and had a hand in drafting pretty much every single successful ballot initiative that has happened in the states since then. He was a co-founder of National Cannabis Industry Association and numerous other groups, partner and co-founder at Vicente Sederberg law firm, and really just a tremendous guy. I mean, one of the most humble and visionary people that I have met in this movement and in the industry. I mean, when I first started back in 2008, he was one of the first people to really reach out to me and take me under his wing. Since then, he had been a constant friend and mentor to me. Even when I didn't know I needed it most. His loss is being felt tremendously right now.
Well, I can only imagine the impact that he's had on you and others in the trenches in Washington, D.C. And I understand he was a very young man, too, relatively. I think he was in his 50s. Am I right?
Yeah, that's correct. But,
yeah.
Anybody that has received any benefit from regulated cannabis systems in this country owes Steve a debt of gratitude. I mean, he was always the guy behind the scenes, not trying to get the spotlight, but just continuously working on improving cannabis policy in this country, and with a mind towards true justice. And yeah, he's definitely going to be missed.
Well, our deepest condolences to his family and friends like yourself. And let's hope that his efforts will finally come true, seeing the passing of federal either decriminalization or legalization. And there actually was a little bit of a movement towards that. And something I found interesting, that federal lawmakers this week filed a bill to legalize medical cannabis for veterans. Can you talk a little bit about where that is at and how that all came about?
Well, this bill has been in play for a couple of years now, and unfortunately it didn't gain traction in earlier years that it had been introduced, but it's being co-sponsored by Representative Barbara Lee and Representative David Joyce from California and Ohio, respectively, and Democrat and Republican, respectively. And this bill would basically create opportunities for veterans to be able to access medical cannabis. It would also mandate study about replacement for opioids and things of that nature. But I think most prominently, it would remove criminal penalties under the federal system for veterans who have medical cannabis recommended to them. And perhaps even more importantly, it would allow doctors in the VA system to actually recommend medical cannabis to their patients in states where it's legal, which so far has been completely off the table. And I think that would be a tremendous step forward.
David? I know you have one. David. Come on. I know you have a question.
Oh, he's on mute still.
Of course he's on mute because he's trying to stay,
I'm
technically.
trying to be quiet because I just fidget all the time. I can't sit still. I'm always looking around. I'm looking at the feed to see if people got comments on there. And so
The dogs are barking. Go ahead, David.
All right. So Chuck Schumer wants reform, but Joe Biden keeps saying no. How do you think they need to move? What do they need to do to get reform efforts to move forward?
Well, comprehensive cannabis policy reform, particularly descheduling, was always going to be driven by Congress, not by the executive branch, largely because the executive branch doesn't have the power to do it. Regardless of the fact that President Biden is not in support of full legalization and regulation, and regardless of some of the antiquated policies that some of his staff administration still has regarding their employees, I don't see a world in which President Biden would veto or interfere with passage of comprehensive descheduling legislation in either chamber going forward. I mean, this is something that is supported by more than 2/3 of Americans and is even more popular among Democrats. And the social justice and economic benefits of doing so are really impossible to ignore. Luckily, we've got Vice President Harris in a really good position to be able to whisper in his ear and give him a nudge in the right direction, as well as numerous members of his inner circle. So, I don't think that that Biden is an obstacle, really, despite what it may seem in either the press or through actions that the administration takes, because all of them have been pretty easily explainable and fairly benign. None of them have been directly interfering with the the progress of cannabis policy reform. And you can kind of see that in the appointees that we've seen to both the attorney general position as well as the nomination for the new head of the DEA. These are both people that are not strong drug warriors, and while their positions on cannabis might be a little bit fuzzy at this point, they both have expressed an interest in pursuing evidence-based policy. And, all three of us know that the evidence is clearly there in support of any prohibition. And I think that we can expect, at the very least, reasonable and rational policy decisions from both of these two offices going forward. When it comes to the DEA, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll see a deprioritization of anything cannabis related that isn't directly tied to transnational drug trafficking organizations, and hopefully a relatively smooth handoff of cannabis issues from the DEA to other federal regulatory agencies as we get closer to or after we end federal prohibition, such as the FDA or the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau.
I don't know where David goes. He always disappears in the middle of things, but that's all right. I'm going to ask this question about the Safe Banking Act, since that seems to be the lowest hanging fruit as far as any kind of reform will go. What's the latest on that? And will we see some movement on that next week?
We actually just heard from the sponsors' offices this week that they plan to bring it to the House floor for a vote next week. Maybe on 420, maybe not. We'll see. But I think that it's really important to note that the House has passed the Safe Banking Act in one form or another 3 times already since initially passing it as standalone legislation in 2019. And so we expect another iteration of passage of this bill, and we hope that the Senate takes it up without delay.
We joke about 420. That is Tuesday of next week. Is it possible that first of all, the fact that they actually understand it is 420 is actually progress, isn't it, Morgan?
Yeah, and I think that sometimes they might be interested in getting a hold of a little bit of the popular zeitgeist around it. Interestingly enough, as a policy guy, 420 used to be the slowest day of the year because everybody was trying to, at least in terms of media, because everybody was working on either funny stories or concentrating on consumption stories or industry stories. They weren't focusing on policy. And now it's getting to the point where 420 is a really big deal across the board for anybody involved in any aspect of the cannabis space. And I think that that's an interesting evolution that I've noticed personally.
And of course, I take this opportunity to explain to people what we're going to be doing on 420. We do live stream 24/7 now, news, information, and educational content on our Roku channel, which is PCM TV. But on Tuesday, I'll be at a local medical dispensary here in Massachusetts, Revolutionary Clinics, and we'll be doing live cut-ins every hour from that dispensary. So again, there's so many activities around that holiday. I don't know if I'll ever see the day where it'll be a national holiday, but certainly amongst the cannabis community, they all know what day it is and when it comes on the calendar. And what a shame that they missed 4/20/20 last year, right?
Well, I mean, interestingly, I was just surfing around on the net and saw that apparently April is now officially National Cannabis Awareness Month. It's an interesting development, and I think
That's
it's really indicative that of the progress that we've made and the stigma that is being steadily removed from both the industry as well as consumers of cannabis.
Hey, David, do you think you could sit still long enough to ask another question? And unmute your, oh, wait, now I have to say, and unmute yourself first. Okay, David, go ahead.
Hey, Morgan, what are you doing on Friday afternoons on a regular basis? You just want to take over for me?
I do look forward to these interviews, but normally my Friday afternoons are pretty packed, just like any other day. I mean, the work is never done when it comes to cannabis policy reform, and that's kind of a point that I'd like to reiterate to your viewers. You know, even though things seem inevitable, they don't always stay that way, and it requires constant effort. So I'd like to encourage everybody to continue reaching out to your lawmakers and urging them to support cannabis policy reform measures, both in Congress and at the state level. And please continue, and if you haven't already, become involved in advocacy efforts at every level, because this stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because of the hard work of people like Steve Fox and people like my colleagues at NCIA and Drug Policy Alliance and Marijuana Policy Project and NORML. And you know, the pendulum can always swing backwards. So it's absolutely vital for us all to keep the pressure on to see the change that we want in terms of you know, federal, state, and local policy.
Okay, David, your turn. Go ahead.
So this past week, there was a great article in Marijuana Business Daily about the IRS audit manual for cannabis. Any insights you can give us about that? Were there any surprises that you saw with respect to the IRS and their auditing of marijuana firms?
Not particularly. I mean, you know, illegal cannabis businesses have always been you know, kind of easy pickings for exorbitant tax payments. I think that they're probably paying a lot more attention to it now because the issue has become much more public. But I think that, you know, the real takeaway from that is that anybody that's involved in regulated cannabis businesses needs to be extra careful about exactly how they file their federal taxes now, because the IRS is watching, and they're watching hard.
Yep.
They do seem to be able to target a few cannabis businesses out there as well. And what I took away from that article more than anything else is some of the advice given by the people that John Schroyer and the other people that worked on that article from MJ Biz Daily was, if the IRS comes calling, don't have a chat with them. Call your attorney. Good advice, right?
Yeah, call your lawyer and call your accountant.
Absolutely. And let them do their jobs and talk directly with the IRS, because the IRS seems to have this reputation of trying to get an edge on businesses, and they try to avoid those professionals. So don't give them an extra at-bat, as it were, or an extra strike for a sports analogy, right? I mean, that's really what you want to tell them.
Absolutely. I mean, and the closer that we get to federal federal descheduling, and the closer that we get to getting rid of 280E, we can expect to see a lot more scrutiny of cannabis businesses to make sure that they're totally in line, because their job is to reap as much tax revenue as possible. And when they have a limited window in which to do that, I think that they're going to be paying a lot more attention to people that are filing these you know, their tax reports. And you know, it could be very, very problematic and result in massive tax bills. I mean, we've seen from the Harborside case that that is absolutely the case, especially if you're a more prominent member of the industry. But this goes the same for mom and pops. You've got to be compliant with your taxes, and frankly, it's abominable the level of taxes that people have to pay at the federal level because they can't deduct business expenses. But the bottom line is, until the law changes, you have to follow it as quickly as possible, and they can go after you retroactively.
Wow.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges if you're in the cannabis industry is the fact that everybody is under the microscope and everybody has to follow those rules to the letter of the law because they're being looked at not just by the regulators, but by the media, because the media loves to kind of blow things out of proportion. So when a cannabis company gets in trouble, it's going to lead the news. And you don't want to give any more ammunition to those who are trying to kind of sustain prohibition at this point. At least, again, my humble opinion on that. David, you got a question?
I do. Morgan, who do you think is going to legalize? What state do you think will legalize next?
That's a really tough question. So far in the first 4 months of 2021, we've seen 3 states make cannabis or pass cannabis legalization laws, including the first southern state, Virginia. So, I mean, for lack of a better phrase, we're really on a roll here. I think that, we can probably look forward to Connecticut and possibly Delaware, Rhode Island. Beyond that, I think it might be a little bit difficult to determine exactly, what the next likely candidates are. I mean, clearly there's a huge push in the Northeast because nobody wants to get left behind now that New Jersey and New York have both passed legalization laws, and New Jersey is already in the process of implementing. And those states have already been considering cannabis legalization for a number of years. The real question is going to come down to if lawmakers and advocates can come to an agreement on the exact nature of what that looks like, and particularly if the social justice components of these bills can be kept in the legislation or added to it where it's lacking. That's going to be huge. But another big issue is just time. How much time is left in the state legislative session. So I think it's going to be difficult to determine who the next ones are going to be. But I am cautiously optimistic that we're going to see another 2 to 4 states pass adult use legislation in this year.
That would make 2021 the most successful year in the legalization movement, right? Because there hasn't been 3 states in 2 weeks, ever. And now we could get a couple of more before the end of the year. Again, Morgan, you guys in Washington, D.C. and the other lobbyists down there, I really do marvel at the work you've done because you picked up the momentum and you just keep it going. So congrats on efforts so far.
I appreciate that. But I mean, it wouldn't be possible without the work of state level lobbyists and state level activists and even local activists who are trying to change the minds of their individual city councilors. This is a group effort and something that requires all hands on deck.
Absolutely. Well, Morgan Fox, we're glad that your hand's on deck.
Whoa, Jimmy, hold on. I got another question.
Oh, for crying out loud, we're off the all right, go ahead, David.
What state of all the states out there you think would be the most significant if they legalized it in influencing the federal government to take action?
Oh, go ahead.
That's a really tough question, but like right off the top of my head, I think probably Texas.
That's funny. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's funny. And I thought Mississippi, and I know Mississippi's trying to do something now. Just as another southern state, perhaps the king of the southern states, although Georgia's out there too, I know. But anyway, I don't want to get into that.
I mean, I feel like so goes Texas, or as Texas goes, so goes the rest of the South. And also, you just have to look at the representation in Congress that state has.
Right. Well, yeah. I'm not going there. That being said, that border that's along Texas, that country that's just south of the United States, Mexico continues to dilly and dally a little bit, but they too are going in the right direction as far as a nation to finally pass it. That's going to have to put even more pressure on Texas, won't it?
Yeah, I would think so. Again, you accurately mentioned that the Texas legislative body continues pushing this a little bit farther down the road, but they are headed in the right direction. At this point, we're kind of looking at almost a reversal in terms of transnational drug organizations and the way that they're dealing with cannabis. And obviously, Mexico is going to have to be very, very careful not to allow too much intrusion or any intrusion, but I mean, some of it's probably inevitable, of these criminal organizations into the legal market. But at the same time, I think that when you have a border the size of Texas and people can legally go across the border and purchase cannabis, it's going to create a lot of incentives for Texas lawmakers to start reviewing their policy. And there are a number of bills already in play right now. Unfortunately, the lieutenant governor does not support them at all, and I'm not really sure what. But we're looking at a whole slate of bills between expanding medical cannabis to out and out tax and regulate legalization in the state. And I think that there's an opportunity now to really get at least some incremental changes passed at the state level. And we're also seeing sort of the same pattern that happened in Colorado, where municipalities are opting to make cannabis possession a lowest law enforcement priority and opting to decriminalize it at the local level in accordance with the desires of the people, but also in sort of just seeing where the tea leaves are.
Absolutely. Morgan Fox is someone who likes to read those tea leaves on a regular basis. We thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to talking with you next month on the Green Rush. Thanks so much for joining us, Morgan.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
and of course, now it is 420-ish, okay? And that is when we celebrate all things cannabis. We talk about the Waldos. They're the group out of San Rafael, California. They kind of started this 420 thing, and law enforcement picked it up, and they were using it for a long time about public consumption of cannabis going on at the corner of Main and Vine Street or wherever they happen to be. And then, of course, the cannabis community picked up on it. And even a songwriter in New England from New Hampshire, Jonathan Edwards, penned this song Shanty decades ago, and it has served as my personal 420. So sit back, enjoy Shanty. On the other side, we've got the chairman of the board of Cheech and Chong Enterprises on hold. Danny Keith will be joining us. Don't go away. We come back with more after this.